In this video, we'll discuss the degree of operating leverage. The degree of operating leverage can be considered a measure of risk for a business, but it can also help us understand how much a business stands to gain depending on their level of investment in fixed costs and the volume of units that they are able to sell. Let's define the term. The degree of operating leverage, or DOL, measures the sensitivity of a company's operating income to changes in sales, indicating how a percentage change in sales will affect operating income. Real quick, it's also known as, or I've seen it in other textbooks, as the operating leverage factor and the operating leverage ratio, but we'll stick with degree of operating leverage. And what this is saying when it says it measures the sensitivity of a company's operating income to changes in sales is perhaps easiest to visualize if we just look at a very simplified income statement. We'll begin with revenues and subtract variable costs. That equals the contribution margin. From that, we subtract fixed costs, and that equals operating income. And what this is saying is for a given level of sales, this is true. Operating income is calculated in this way. However, if that level of sales were to change, revenues would change, variable costs would change, and this would all have some impact on operating income. So we can use the degree of operating leverage to help us calculate what that change in operating income will be. And this calculation, it's useful for comparing different scenarios and understanding risk for a given level of sales. When the level of sales changes, revenues change, variable costs change, and those changes are all captured in the contribution margin. So we can simplify our calculations by taking the contribution margin and comparing it to operating income. Thus, the degree of operating leverage is equal to the contribution margin divided by operating income. Let's demonstrate with an example. We can imagine a business that sells an app, maybe for a phone. The app might be called the Make Accounting Great app. And this app has a selling price per unit of $200, and they expect to sell 40 units in the period. Maybe their service provider, who helps them develop and maintain and service the app, host the app, gives them a few different options with respect to costing. Let's take a look at these different options. Scenario 1, the business is told you can invest in higher fixed costs, like a greater upfront fee, to lower your variable costs. Scenario 2, in between, there are less fixed costs, less of an upfront fee for a higher variable cost, a higher commission for every license sold. And then scenario 3, which would be zero fixed costs, so there's zero risk, but the highest variable cost for each license sold, the variable cost will be a lot higher. Let's put all of this into a table. For scenario 1, the selling price per unit will be $200 a unit. The variable cost per unit will be $120. The contribution margin then is $80 a unit. And the total contribution margin, if we take the contribution margin per unit of $80, multiply that by 40 sales in the period, we get $3,200. Subtract the fixed costs. Under scenario 1, fixed costs will be the highest. This will be $2,000. This gives us an operating income of $1,200. Scenario 2, the selling price hasn't changed. It's still $200. But remember, the variable costs were going to go up under this scenario to $150. That gives us a contribution margin of $50 per unit. Multiplied by 40 units is a total contribution margin of $2,000. Fixed costs get to go down as a trade-off for the higher variable costs. And so fixed costs will be $800 in this scenario for operating income of $1,200. And then we look at scenario 3. Scenario 3, the selling price per unit will be $200. The variable cost per unit will be all the way up to $170 for a contribution margin of $30 a unit. The total contribution margin is going to be $1,200. Subtract fixed costs of 0, That's the trade-off in scenario 3, a much higher variable cost, but no fixed costs. And this gives us an operating income of $1,200. So what we can see here is that at this level of sales, 40 units, the business would be indifferent to whatever scenario, whatever cost structure they choose between variable costs and fixed costs. But you can hopefully start to see that scenario 1 is the riskiest one because the fixed costs are much higher. The break-even point would be much higher. So scenario 1 is quite risky up until 40 units. Whereas scenario 3 is the least risky. The break-even point is 0. You don't have to sell anything to break even because you have no fixed costs that you need to cover. What does this all have to do with the degree of operating leverage? Well, we could calculate it, and if it's a measure of risk, we would expect for scenario 1, the degree of operating leverage to be highest because the fixed costs are highest. And for scenario 3, the degree of operating leverage should be lowest because the fixed costs are the lowest. We don't need all of these line items here. Let's just isolate the contribution margin row and the operating income row. And let's do some math. For scenario 1, $3,200 divided by 1,200 gives us a degree of operating leverage of 2.67. Scenario 2, 2,000 divided by 1,200 gives us a degree of operating leverage of 1.87. Scenario 3, 1,200 divided by 1,200 gives us a degree of operating leverage of 1. And sure enough, scenario 1 is the most risky. Scenario 3 is the least risky. What this also means, however, is that scenario 1 will create the biggest positive changes to operating income with every additional unit sold. So once you are beyond 40 units, this point of indifference where operating income is equal for all 3 scenarios, scenario 1 would be the best place to be. So if this business had confidence that they could sell more than 40 units, they would probably want to have that higher investment fixed costs, and they would want to have a cost structure like scenario 1. With that in mind, let's make a change to the quantity and actually utilize the degree of operating leverage number. Right now, the quantity is at 40. Let's get rid of this phone, get that out of the way, and let's change the quantity and let's increase it by 50%. 40 times 1.5 or a 50% increase will equal 60 units. Isolate scenario 1, and we'll go ahead and use the degree of operating leverage to try to determine quickly what the new operating income would be going from 40 to 60 units. The way to do that is we would start off with the 1,200 in operating income we already have at 40 units, and then we'll try to calculate the rest. So 1,200 plus 2.67 times 50% times 1,200 equals $2,800. That would be operating income if we had an increase of 50% on an original quantity of 40 units. So we are clear on where all the numbers are coming from. The degree of operating leverage is used here, and the percentage increase is used here. I hope you found this video to be helpful. Until next time, I will say thank you for watching, and may your journey be joyful.
We're standing on the edge with numbers in our hands, trying to understand the lay of the land. Sales are rising, but what does it mean? Operating income, it's more than just a dream. You see, we have to climb higher since the risk is real. With every change in sales, operating income feels. But there's a formula that guides us, that shows the way. The degree of leverage, it can guide our way. With every move in sales, it's more than just a guess. Operating leverage is the key to our success. In the quiet of the night, we run the numbers through. Will our income soar or will it fall into the blue? Contribution margins, they're telling us the score, but it's the leverage that opens up the door. It's a delicate balance between profit and risk, but with the degree of operating leverage, it's fast and brisk. We've got our guidance star, helps us see just how close or far we are. With every move in sales, it's more than just a guess. Operating leverage is the key to our success. It's a dance on the numbers, a rhythm so true, where a change in the beat could change all that we knew. But with leverage by our side, we navigate the flow. In the world of business, it's the way that we grow. With every move in sales, it's more than just a guess. Operating leverage, it's the key to our success. So when the sales start to shift and you're feeling unsure, remember the leverage, it'll help you endure. With door by your side, you'll always see the light. In the dance of business, you'll make it through the night. It's a delicate balance between profit and risk, but with the degree of operating leverage, it's fast and brisk. We've got our guidance star, helps us see just how close or far we are. In the world of business, it's the way that we grow.